everybody. Welcome to another boss review. I've been using them interchangeably. Let's just go with boss ratings. We're rating some bosses here. I think that's what I started with. And today we're rating the amazing boss heralding from an expansion that we know and love, Battle for Azeroth. We have Grong. Of course, he was an early boss in the Battle for fuck. All right. Hey everybody, welcome to another boss review ratings review. We're doing. I think we're using rating another boss rating video, and today we're rating that amazing boss from that amazing expansion and that amazing raid. You know, it's of course it's Grong. It's you know him, you love him, you want to meet him. Of course, Grong heralding from Battle for Azeroth, and of course the Battle for Dazar'alor. BOD, he's from BOD, is an early boss in that instance. And of course, he is one of those bosses that had kind of two different flavors depending on if you fought him as Horde or Alliance. Which, you know, we'll go through sort of the different lore. When I do explain the abilities, I am, of course, going to be using the Horde version of those abilities. But there's analogous ones to the Alliance ones. They really just had different names, maybe a couple different flavors or colors and things like that. But it's the same fight either way. But of course, Grong actually has some backstory, some lore, which is, I mean, it's surprising for a character such as this, but he does have a little bit of a backstory, a little bit of an interesting one. So here it is, right? If you fight him as Horde, essentially, Grong is from some of the guerrilla clans around Dazar'alor, and he has seen what the Horde has been doing, and it says, I'm going to offer my services to the Alliance. I'm an intelligent, large guerrilla, and I would like to, you know, provide my service to the Alliance, and I'm going to stop the Horde from doing whatever they're going to do. So he essentially became a living super weapon, and with the help of some of the various gnomes, was able to sort of build himself a nice little, like, became like a super monkey, essentially. And yeah, he was sort of trying to block the Horde from continuing up the temple. On the Alliance side, a little bit differently. Essentially, the Alliance in this version of their fight, they enter Dazar'alor after the Horde. So Grong is already dead, and Grong has been risen or resurrected from the dead to, you know, serve the Horde at this point. And now he's starting to fight back against the Alliance after they helped him. So yeah, so he just didn't get his clean death he wanted. He was all allianced up, and they made him fight for the Horde. So the biggest difference, right, is in the Horde version, it's much more like there's some mechs in it. We'll talk about that, things like that. Much more sort of like nature focus in terms of the damage types. While in the Alliance version, since he is raised from the dead, much more shadow focus, some shadowy creatures or the ads and things like that. So in any event, that's the lore there. Now, in terms of abilities, Grong sort of has a couple, right? His major ability, his signature ability, of course, is Tantrum. That is what is triggered when he reaches 100 energy, you know, automatically, or there's a way which we'll get to for players to trigger that earlier. Essentially, Tantrum is just a large-scale AoE that puts a stacking debuff on the raid, where you will take more damage from the next time Tantrum hits. So that is sort of that ability. To trigger that ability, like I mentioned, either he gets to 100 energy, he's gaining energy over the course of the fight. You either wait till he gets to 100 energy, take 4 hits, and then wipe, because that's not the way you do the fight. Or there are 2 ads that spawn. I think, what are they called? Ape-tagonizers in the Horde version. They're just basically mechs. And they do like sort of a little bit of an AoE around themselves. If Grong gets hit by that, he immediately gains energy, so you kind of want to move him away. But then they drop an item called a, what is the name of it? It's like an Aptagonizer core. And you use that core on Grong after you pick it up to trigger Tantrum. So the idea is, like, you want to kill these ads very quickly, or really kill one of them very quickly, trigger the Tantrum, kill the next one, and then pick up that orb. Hold on to it because it does have a timer until the very last second. Once your debuffs drop off from that first Tantrum, trigger it again. And then that's sort of the rigmarole of how the ads introduce. Again, Alliance have a similar thing. I don't know the names of them. We're just going to skip through that. From there, Grong does have a interesting tank sort of mechanic. It's one of those mechanics that we've seen time to time where he will cast in succession 3 abilities. And essentially the tanks need to make sure they just don't get hit by two of the same ability. So it's like a two ability casted in a set of three. If I can do this, and the idea is like it's bestial smash, bestial smash, and rending bite. You basically just don't want to take two bestial smashes because they put a debuff on you and get hit by the first one. You'll take like something like 300% damage for the next one. So just don't get by two, and you're easy. Other than that, at the end of that bestial combo, after he casts those three abilities, he will chuck his currently targeted tank at a player and do AoE damage around that player. So if you get targeted as like a ranged or melee, run out of the group, tank lands on top of you, get stunned. There is some other interesting things that he does, which is sort of a group, kind of a concept of grouping up and then spreading out. So he randomly fire out like magic missiles that put fire patches on the ground. You don't want to stand in them, so you'll sort of want to be somewhat spread as a raid, so everybody's not moving at the same time. But then he also does an ability called Ferocious Roar, which essentially means that once it's a raid-wide AoE for a little bit of damage, not a ton. But if you're not next to someone, when that goes off, you'll be automatically feared. So you sort of want to stay clumped up. And the way it worked, we'll talk about from a strategy perspective. Generally, teams used 4 separate ranged camps. So that way everybody wasn't moving if fire was on the ground, and then the melee camp stood together and tanks stood on top of each other with your melee healers like a Mistweaver or Holy Paladin standing on the tanks when one tank got thrown if there was an overlap. Then the final ability that he does do in this fight is of course you guys aren't of course what is Reverberating Slam, which is just an AoE. It's like in melee AoE Void Zone. He slams down, puts the Void Zone. You have like a second or two to move out of it, run out of it. It explodes and then run back in. Again, these can overlap, so you might get a slam into a roar, so you have to make sure as melee you run together so then you don't get feared, things like that. So that's the fight. Those are the abilities. So from like a how you did the fight perspective, I mean, it was fairly simple. I sort of explained a little bit already. You'd end up, making sure whenever ads spawn, you immediately swap to them, kept them interrupted. You'd probably assign 2 teams, one to one ad, one to the next ad. Kill one, have a ranged DPS generally pick up the orb, the core. The aptagonizer core, and use that once you're ready. Have cooldowns at the ready, of course, as healers for the tantrums. And then you have a second DPS pick up the next one a little bit later. It was a 40-second debuff, so if you picked it up too soon, the core might actually expire on you before your tantrum stacks reset as a raid. That was always sort of a big issue. So you want to make sure you were, kind of sort of managing that side of it. From a positioning perspective, of course, like I mentioned, you end up having 4 range camps, just so the missiles and the fire patches didn't make sure like everybody had to move one way or the other way. And it also kept you grouped up enough that you wouldn't get feared from the roar. And that's basically it. It wasn't a very tight DPS check. It was a fairly long, I believe, Berserk timer at the time, probably upwards of 10 minutes. So not a very, DPS intensive fight. It was much more about, making sure you had the healing, you had the cooldowns to get through each tantrum, which was the bigger thing, and just make sure you sort of controlled the ads, right? Very much for all intents and purposes, was a patchwork style fight. I mean, you had 2 ads in there, but you dealt with them fairly quickly, got back on the ball. So, true sort of patchwork style. So not exactly interesting from a strategy perspective, and also not exactly difficult from a execution perspective, other than there was some healing that needed to be done, but it was just, doing throughput, making sure you had cooldowns. So, that's Grong. It was not, it was an early fight in a tier that did not have a lot of good fights already. So again, not exciting, not something that's gonna blow your mind like, man, this was cool. So in any event, that's Grong, Patrick style, big old ape. The cool thing about Grong though, and I guess the one, upward thing of it, was that there were 2 sides of it, whether you're Alliance or you're Horde. However, if you only played Horde or you only played Alliance, you actually probably never realized that. So it is what it is. It's Grong. So, all right. So now let's talk a little bit about how do we rate Old Grong, right? So let's go through it. So in terms of execution, I gave this a 3 out of 10. Like I mentioned earlier, DPS wise, not a huge check. There was a slight healing check needed here, but it's early enough that you could get through it. You could power through it with really just adding another healer. You'd be fine. Just make sure you had cooldowns for the tantrum. You're perfect. In terms of strategy, very, very simple. There's one run out mechanic, there's one don't stand in fire mechanic, and there's like kill some ads when they spawn. The only thing would be like, don't pick up orbs right away if you killed the ads at the same time. But other than that, strategy, super simple, very telegraphed in terms of what you needed to do. Key mechanics, gave this a 4 out of 10. Anytime you have to use something that drops on the ground from an ad, you automatically get a couple extra bonus points because it takes a little bit of work to do that. But I mean, other than that, there's a big monkey that jumped around. Maybe you get extra points for that. I don't know. And then finally, unique interactions. This is a 2 out of 10. I mean, there's really nothing here. It's a patchwork style fight, and you just sort of, kill it as quickly as possible. Moving on from there into the style and look and feel section. Of course, we have the boss area. This is a 3 out of 10. It's like halfway up the area that you're kind of climbing the tower with. So like you sort of just fight them randomly. I know the Alliance, and I'm describing the Horde area when I talk about this, but even the Alliance one, I think you just like walk in and show up. So it's just part of the city that you've already seen. Not too exciting. 3 out of 10. I mean, maybe this should be higher, but they reused a lot of the same assets, so not exactly exciting. From a lore perspective, I did bump this up a little bit. I gave it a 4 out of 10, primarily just because they actually did put some story around why the Alliance and Horde fight different ones, and give him a little bit more of a backstory. And like the Horde had been encroaching in his lands. He didn't like that. He was like, head over to the Alliance. I want to be friends with you. I want to stop these Horde idiots because they've been hurting my buds, or like, I don't know, killing trees or something. So he there's some backstory there. 4 out of 10 I think is appropriate. In terms of boss model, I give this a 7 out of 10, only because like they actually built 2 very different models, and the undead one looks actually really good. So I never got to fight it from an Alliance perspective, but they did build 2 models for a single boss. I think it looked pretty cool. 7 out of 10, maybe slightly too high. We'll see, but I thought it was cool looking. It looked cool. And even the ads that spawn, particularly on the Alliance version of the fight, were much better than the Horde one. Finally, memorability, it's a 2 out of 10. And even this, I think, might be slightly too high. However, it's a big monkey. I mean, you don't fight them every day in World of Warcraft, so slightly higher. But it's in BOD, which is like largely a forgettable tier, other than Jaina as the last boss. So there you have it. In terms of final scores, for mechanics and difficulty, ends up with an 11 out of 40. Yikes. And in terms of style and look and feel, ends up with a 16 out of 40, which is slightly better, but does put it at the lower end, and essentially the worst boss we reviewed so far, for a final score of 27 out of 40. Or 27 out of 80. Oh man, 27 out of 80. So that's Grong. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for getting this far in the video. If you don't agree, if you disagree, maybe you do agree, maybe comment or like or subscribe or follow. Like, what are you supposed to do here? Like, subscribe, follow, or comment on the below. And of course, let me know your thoughts. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.